Good morning, everyone. Tell a story about a little girl. She was watching her mother washing dishes, and she noticed her mother had some gray hairs. So she said, "Mommy, what are those gray hairs?" So the mother said, "Every time you give me aggravation, I get a gray hair." So the little girl said, "Is that why Grandma has a head full of gray hair?" This is the month of Av. The word Av means father. It's interesting that the month that we observe the destruction of both of our holy temples is the very same month that's called Father. And the reason is because we refer to this month as Menachemav, that our Father in heaven will comfort us for the destruction of the temples. The opening words of the parsha that we read tomorrow, right before Tisha B'Av, is Eila Dvarim. These are the words that Moshe spoke to the Jewish people. And our rabbis say that Moshe Rabbeinu spoke words of rebuke to the Jewish people. And why did he choose to do this at the end of his life? Because he learned from Jacob. Jacob, our father, rebuked his children in a loving manner right before his death. Why? Because he wanted to show them, I'm passing on. I'm not doing this for my own benefit. I'm doing it for your sake. Because I want you to live better lives. So to Moshe Rabbeinu is saying, as my leadership reign is over, now I'm telling you these words for your own sake. And we learn a number of lessons. One lesson we learn is the importance of rebuke, but to doing it in a loving manner. And a beautiful example of Moshe Rabbeinu doing it in a loving manner is when he criticizes the Jews for the sin of the golden calf, rebukes them, he refers to it in the opening verse by saying, Di Zahab, an abundant of gold. And it's a reference to the sin of the golden calf, where they made the golden calf because of the abundance of gold. But he doesn't spell it out, he just refers to it, alluding to it, to do it in a sensitive way. But the Medrash says something fascinating. You know what he did? He said to the Jewish people, the abundance of gold. And the Medrash says, he said to God, God, you know whose fault it is that the Jews made the golden calf? Maybe they're at fault, but you're also at fault. You know why? You gave them so much gold. And the Medrash gives an analogy, and it's a very modern analogy. The analogy the Medrash says was there was once a father who took his kid, bathed him, groomed him, and put a pouch full of gold coins around his neck, and left him at the door of a house of harlotry. And then in the morning he discovered what his son had done. So the Medrash says, who's at fault? The son or the father? What did you expect from your child when you gave him such an abundance of gold and placed him where you placed him? So to Hashem said, Moshe said to Hashem, Hashem, you gave them all this gold. What did you think they were going to do in a desert with all this gold? You set them up for failure. And I always think about this of our children. Our children have they all walk around with credit cards and cars, and they have a lot of opportunities. Sometimes we give our children too much. That could lead to certain things. But I want to share with you on Tisha B'Av, we remember the story of Kamsa Bar Kamsa. And the temple was destroyed. I don't have to review the story. There was a guy by the name of a guy invited two people to a party. He meant to invite his friend Kamsa, but by mistake he invited Bar Kamsa. And when he threw him out of the party, he got upset, and he went and informed the Roman officials, and it led to the destruction of the temple. So the Marsha, commentary on the Talmud, asks an amazing question. If you look at the Talmud, it says, because of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, the temple was destroyed. The Marsha says, what did Kamsa do wrong? Kamsa was the guy who wasn't invited to the party. He didn't even show up. What are we blaming him? Bar Kamsa is the guy who got angry and went and informed to the Roman officials. And he says an amazing answer. He says the word bar in the Talmud always means what? The son of. Bar Kamsa was the son of Kamsa. And you know why we blame Kamsa? Because he didn't teach his son how to control his impulses. He should have raised his child. When you get angry, you don't go off the rails and lash out and do terrible things. And therefore the father, Kamsa, is held accountable for raising a son like Bar Kamsa, not teaching him self-control. And it shows us the power of the influence and the responsibility we have for our children. And to know how to rebuke them and set them on the proper course in life, but in a loving way. I'll just conclude with a beautiful story. And it's a great example of a loving rebuke. But there was a story about Rabbi Aryeh Levine, the famous tzaddik from Jerusalem, that was once walking down the street, and he sees one of his former students coming down the block. So he was excited to see him, and suddenly he sees the student crosses the street. And I know if a rabbi sees a congregant cross the street, what do? Something's wrong. So he runs after his former student. He says, Chaim, what's going on? How are you? Shalom Aleichem. He says, why did you cross the street when you saw me? So he said, Rabbi, I'll tell you the truth, I'm not religious anymore. And I'm not wearing my yarmulke. I was embarrassed for you to see me without my yarmulke. Rabbi Levine was a short old man, looked at the student and said, Chaim, you know I'm a very short old man, he says. I can't see what's on top of your head. I could only see what's in your heart. And that's a way to rebuke somebody, but do it in a loving way. And that's what Moshe Rabbeinu teaches us, the ability and the power of parents to steer their children lovingly, but also with discipline, to make sure that the consequences of our kids' actions bring us nachas and never shame, like the story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa.